Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Richardson. I'm the Assistant Director of Ecumenical and Pastoral Initiatives at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'm here with two gentlemen that I'm really excited to talk about. We're talking about combating hate online and in social media, and also in the gaming community, which is really interesting. So I'd like to introduce Daniel Kelley. He's the Associate Director for the Center for Technology and Society with the Anti-Defamation League. So welcome so much. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
For sure. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And Mark Toubin, he's the Regional Director of the Southwest region of the Anti-Defamation League.
Glad to be here as well.
Yeah, well, let's just jump right in. Like I said, we'll be discussing technology and society and digital hate. And, I think we all in some way have felt digital hate. So it'll be great to talk with the experts about that kind of thing. So Mark, maybe you can kick us off with just an explanation of what the Anti-Defamation League does and who you are for people who haven't been exposed to your work before.
Sure, Bridget. The Anti-Defamation League has been around for a long time, over 100 years. And our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. We are a local, national, and global organization. My role is to be the regional director of the Southwest region, which is headquartered in Houston and covers about half of Texas. We go from East Texas and South Texas, and then all the way up to El Paso. And part of what we do is we have an organization called the Coalition for Mutual Respect, for example. And I just wanted to mention that in particular because there are two members of your organization who are very involved, and that's Father Nesty and Father Ben. And they're terrific individuals who have contributed strongly to our work. So I just wanted to thank them for what they do. ADL has a number of pieces to what we do. We fight anti-Semitism. We confront discrimination, and we secure justice. We work with legislators. We work with courts. We work in the public square. We work on issues of criminal justice, education equity, free speech, immigrant and refugee rights, LGBTQ rights, race and racial justice, religious freedom, voting rights, and women's equity are just some of the things that we focus on. We combat hate and we protect communities. And this is where we get into the issues of combating cyber hate and extremism and terrorism and bigotry. We work with law enforcement in order to ensure that our communities are free from extremists who are trying to do harm. We stand up for Israel. And we also promote respect in schools in our communities. And many people have heard of our acclaimed No Place for Hate program, which is celebrating its 20th year. We have anti-bullying programs and many other types of both student as well as adult programs that help people understand the importance of rejecting bias. So these are just some of the things that we do, and I'm very pleased to be here today to be focusing on how we can help people understand the issues that are going on in the cyber world, because this is a major area where hate is occurring. And so I'm happy that Daniel Kelley, my colleague from New York, is joining us today to share his insights into this world.
Yeah, and that's when I learned more about ADL. You cover so many different things, but when you told me you had a Center for Technology and Society, I was like, wow, they really are, on top of where the culture is moving too. So maybe Daniel, you can explain a little bit about your work and online hate. Like, what does that look like in your world?
Sure. Happy to talk about it. So. Yeah, as Mark said, the Center for Technology and Society is part of the Anti-Defamation League. Our center was founded in 2017 with the idea to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all in digital spaces. So ADL has worked in fighting cyber hate since the 1980s. Our first report was computerized networks of hate. It was looking at forums where white supremacists were posting in the mid 80s, right? And we worked with AOL in the early 1990s, and then working with social media over the past since the founding of social media in the early 2000s, and more recently looking and working with the video game industry as online games become more sort of digital social platforms, and sort of working across these different industries, doing advocacy with the different social media companies and online game companies. I think there's a couple different avenues that we work with folks. So working with folks like Mark in the regional offices across the country, we do incident response where people who are being harassed online report incidents to our regional offices and say, either I am personally being harassed on platform X, or I've seen, some hateful, a T-shirt on Amazon, or something on Etsy, or any number of different sort of ways in which people are not necessarily being directly harassed, but are seeing hateful iconography or imagery or other kinds of hate on platforms. And then we, both instruct folks how to use reporting systems on platforms, and when necessary, escalate them to the platform. So we work on the sort of ground level with people across the US, but we also work with the platforms directly. Each sort of platform, whether it's a social media platform or an online game platform, is governed by a set of policies. We work with them to sort of look at their policies across their platform, and see, how do we best advocate for our constituents to make sure that the platforms are inclusive of the experience of the folks that we are, they're representative of our constituents, and that they promote a respectful and inclusive environment for all people. So yeah, I think let me adjust my camera here a little bit.
Yeah, you're fine. And y'all recently did or not recently, but you did a survey to gauge online hate and see what was happening. What came from that?
Sure. So we did a survey both last year and this year, looking at online hate and harassment on social media. So the only real sort of measurement of hate and harassment on social media before this was really a survey Pew did in 2017, and so we built on the research that Pew did in 2017 to really try and get an understanding of what is the full scope of hate on social media. I think certainly the platforms provide transparency reports where they talk about their own enforcement, but at present there are sort of three big questions that no social media company can answer, which is, one, how much hate is there on your platform? Two, what communities are being impacted? And three, is anything you're doing working, right? They're really, companies announce, product changes or policy changes, but there really isn't any way for the public to know, are things getting better or worse? Is this highly publicized change that you're making actually making an impact for the people, like people who report incidents to us across the US and connect to our regional offices, right? And so we did this survey because we wanted to get our arms around, okay, like from the perspective of people who are, perspective of people who are targeted by hate on these platforms, what are people actually experiencing, and like how do we look across social platforms as a whole, and find out a general understanding of the amount of hate and harassment. So we found that in 2020, a little less than half, 44% of Americans experienced some form of online harassment, and 28% experienced severe harassment, which include physical threats, sexual harassment, stalking, and sustained harassment. And so in terms of hate, which is specifically harassment targeting people because of their identity, 35% of folks were targeted on social media in the US because of their identity, including 25% of folks who are targeted because of their race or ethnicity, 25% of folks who are targeted because of their gender, 21% because of their religion, 11% because of their disability, or 9% because of their sexual orientation. So these are not insubstantial numbers, and I think they speak to the prevalence of hate in social media, and I think they help us to understand. Okay, let's see if we can get our arms around the target's experience of hate and harassment in social media.
Yeah, and when we had our pre-conversation, looking at that and those numbers, it's really staggering. But Mark, you also mentioned something too, how online hate may be stopping the work of social justice, which is so key to what you do with ADL. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how online hate, and when people target others in that way, it shifts the conversation from, doing the work to advocate for others to just being hateful and belittling people for whatever reason, for power, for building up oneself or something.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens both, I think, on a personal level and on a larger level, and I've seen it, in both ways. And I think we talked about this as well, which is just on a personal level, and I think everybody's experienced this to some extent, which is, on Facebook, for example, where people that will post something that is beyond just about a political difference, but is actually racist. And when you try to point that out even gently, it is perceived as that you're not being open to their political point of view, and it makes that conversation so difficult, because it's not about being open to political differences. It's about being tolerant or intolerant of racist statements and that are over the line. And so it's really hard now in this climate in particular to have these kinds of conversations where it's not about their political opinion, but it is about racism. And how can you point that out? And so in terms of the larger issue of social justice, it all kind of get mucks up, for lack of a more intellectual term, I suppose, that everything sort of boils down to kind of what I just mentioned, which is you can't have these sort of larger conversations with people who believe that sort of they're being attacked, and then it gets into this very personal kind of discussion, and so it makes the whole effort of trying to advance social justice so much more difficult with people who you don't necessarily eye to eye with. Though they may sort of generally believe in doing good, it all kind of gets caught up right now, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, and Daniel, you study a little bit of the company's role in that too, regulating what can be put out by an individual online. Because Mark, you had mentioned even previously too that it may not actually represent what someone thinks sometimes. They're just like, oh, I just shared it. You're like, why on earth would you share something like that? But, we can talk about that a little more later. But Daniel, the company may have a part in this. So maybe you can share a little on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a couple things that are related to this. So one is, I think, um, where do you even begin? But in terms of, so I guess there's a concept of, so I think that what we need to think about when we think about the governance of these spaces is the sort of difference between, first of all, none of these platforms are governed by the First Amendment, which is a common misunderstanding. The First Amendment is meant to is meant to sort of address government overreach of speech, and Facebook and Twitter are not governments, right? And so can do ostensibly whatever they want on their platforms, right? But I think, underpinning the rules that govern these platforms is they are American companies. I think they are motivated by sort of speech principles and by the First Amendment as the guiding principle, if not something that they're tied to as a law. And I think there's a misunderstanding in that sense about what free speech is. The difference between sort of free for all speech and the freedom to speak, right? Which I think is sort of what you're talking about in terms of how people are silenced in different spaces for for the purpose of social justice work. I mean, it's for me, it's never more clear than in video game spaces, which is, so in video games, one of the main ways that you communicate is through voice, right? Most games have the ability for folks to talk using their own voice to other players who are ostensibly strangers, right? And when I talk to people who play online games and who are women or who are people of color, they sort of look at, when I ask them whether they use voice chat or how they use voice chat, they look at me strangely. And of course I don't use voice chat, right? Why would I use voice chat? As soon as I start speaking, other people make certain assumptions about my identity and start targeting with me for harassment because I'm a woman or because I'm Black or because I'm Latinx, right? They, and so people are literally silencing themselves, right? These spaces are silencing them, and they're choosing to silence themselves rather than be subject to harassment and hate. We're seeing today, it was announced that the Biden-Harris campaign are creating lawn signs in Animal Crossing, right? And so we're starting to see, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, visited a family in Animal Crossing. We're starting to see the use of these spaces in a much more political way. And so when you have, when the generally accepted practice is that, oh, of course I'm going to silence myself in this space, and you see the evolution of these spaces into becoming, squares for political discourse, I think there's an incredible amount of onus on the industry to really think thoughtfully about how do we, create a space where people feel free to speak, right? Where they feel like when they speak, they're not going to be targeted because of their identity, um, while also, ensuring that, that we aren't, that there is, that there is the affordances that allow for speech generally. So I think, there's definitely a huge onus on the companies to take more action. And I think also there is and this is where we get to like, is anything working, right? You don't really like a lot of the kinds of stuff that Mark is describing and that you're describing, like, are ostensibly prohibited by the policies of these platforms, but the line between making the policy and enforcing it on there are billions of people on Facebook, right? Enforcing a policy at that scale, like, it's just, there is no platform that can enforce their policies consistently at scale. And so you end up with, a lot of really harmful activity on this platform.
But we know that they can do better, which is what we've asked. And the Stop Hate for Profit campaign Daniel, which I know you've been intimately involved in, I think is indicative of that, and I think you're probably a better person to share those details.
Sure. I'm happy to. So, yeah, earlier this year, we engaged in the Stop Hate for Profit campaign in coalition with the NAACP, Color of Change, the National Hispanic Media Coalition, Free Press, Common Sense Media, and others, with the idea being, can we push? So we've worked with Facebook for many years. We've been collaborative with them. We've involved them in different events and given them the opportunity to speak and engage with them on discussing their policies. And we've been consistently disappointed and consistently frustrated with their progress and with their lack. And this is something that's true across all the organizations that were involved here. So can we find another lever to push to make them pay attention to these real and serious concerns? So we worked across this coalition to get over 1,000 advertisers to say, hey, enough is enough. We're going to pause our spending on Facebook and push to get a number of different changes implemented. And the changes we were asking for are not like, enforce these, your policies consistently at scale, which as I said before, totally impossible given where the technology is, right? It should be possible, right? It's irresponsible that it's not. But what we're asking for as part of this campaign were really practical, product-driven recommendations that were vetted by CTS team at ADL has a team of people who come from the tech world who know about how products function. I'll give one example, which is we ask that on their reporting form, right, that there's a drop-down menu that allows people to indicate their identity when they're reporting hate speech, right? Like this is not, it's like functionally, it's not like rocket science, right? Or computer science, right? It's really like a very fundamental and easy thing for a team to do. But you have to have the will to say, okay, we want to be able to track the experience of people on our platform who are being targeted by hate, and be able to look at the data and say, hey, you know what, this this percent of Jews or this percent of African Americans, this percent of Muslims is being targeted on our platform, and like, what are we going to do to take that data and then really dig in and address it? But before you make those real attempts, you have to be able to measure what are the experience of different communities, and that's just something Facebook has and continues to be unwilling to do.
By the way, Daniel, if you ever come down here, and I take it in NASA, my favorite T-shirt there is, it says, "It's not rocket science." Oh wait, yes it is. So in that case, and by the way, just I don't know when this is going to air, but I want people to know that it's morning, which is why I am drinking coffee, and also I have a new like a HD camera, which is why my shirt appears to be like shining or glimmering. I'm not really sure. Not the right check shirt to wear with a new HD camera, but
oh, that's great.
Like a matrix or something. I'm not really sure what's going on here.
I'm pretty sure everyone's going to hold it against you.
Yeah. I had to get that out there.
Prevent the online hate, right?
Anyway, yeah, exactly. Well, I don't want to like hypnotize people.
Yeah,
like, it's gonna, people stare too long. So please avert your eyes to those that are watching. I don't want somebody to hurt themselves. Bridget, you mentioned about intent, and everybody, a lot of people, whether it's Facebook or whether it's the individual that I was referring to earlier that posts something, it's like, well, we don't mean to allow hate. Or I didn't realize that when I was posting this, I didn't post it because I was trying to post something racist. I just was posting it for some other reason. You know, those those answers, quite frankly, are some of the most frustrating because um, maybe the first time, but not the second, and definitely not the third. When these things happen, the bottom line is, you know, people and companies are responsible for, you know, you are responsible for what you post, and you know, ultimately, you know, as Daniel said, I mean, they can't be responsible for every, you know, single thing that somebody posts, but they are ultimately responsible for how they operate their platform, and there, when there are things that can be done to limit how hate can spread, uh, that they should be responsible for taking those actions. And there are too many times where people are just saying, well, it wasn't what I meant. And those answers aren't good enough anymore, because we've seen what rejecting responsibility has gotten us uh, to this point. And so we just have to push beyond that answer.
Yeah, and there seems to be a disconnect between what you think your online presence is and who you actually are. And I don't quite understand how that happens because, you know, it seems very much that your online presence would be who you are, but especially in gaming, it's totally not, right, Daniel? Like that's the freedom sometimes in gaming, is that you can be someone else, or you can be a little bit more over the top or something like that. So maybe we can just talk about how people see themselves online and the things that they say, the things that they share, and how that even ties into human dignity. Someone understanding that you're talking to another person online, or that you're responding to another human being. And you know, we had discussed it before, sometimes people do these things or say these things and share, and it's tearing families apart. You know, there's a lack of restraint with what people want to say or what they post. And where does that come from? Why can't you control what you feel like you have to say online? I don't, what do you think, both of you?
And I think in gaming, I feel like there's a whole culture of people who at this point are live streaming video games, right? The people who, like, on platforms like Twitch, right? When you live stream a video game, you are, you know, playing a video game live, uh, and you know, there's a window that shows the game, and then there's a window that shows you. And the people who are most popular are generally people who are fairly outrageous, right, and who are trying to, you know, get views by being sensational, right, and who are not necessarily modeling kinds of behaviors that make games, you know, respectful and inclusive spaces for all people, right? And so when you have people creating these kinds of norms in digital social spaces, like in gaming, right, saying that this is how you play, right, then that creates kind of sort of feedback loop for what is acceptable, right, in these spaces. And so I think part of it is the sort of culture and the role of professional, you know, some of the people, this is what they do for a living, right? They stream or they play esports, right? So what is the responsibility of streamers or esports players as public figures to the culture of games and the culture of digital spaces, right? And where and who's, you know, like, and some of these, you know, are, you know, like when I was talking to one esports team, talked about the window of esports gamers being from something like 16 to 22, right? While their brains are not, you know, fully developed, right? And so, I mean, not that, you know, there isn't, you know, I think that's underestimating people that age a little bit. But you know, um, where are these folks who are, you know, have been playing, are amazing at the game, are suddenly given this platform? Like, where are they to learn, right? That how to be in public and how to be a public figure and what their power is over the people who watch them play, right? Like, this is where I feel like companies, esports teams, um, and civil society have a role to play. I think there's definitely a role for civil society groups like ADL and others to be in conversation with streamers, esports teams about, you know, what is the nature of the public responsibility of these folks who are setting norms.
And Daniel's talking, a lot about people whose identities I think are not known, and those are, particularly problematic. And I think I've probably been talking more about people that you do know, and those are also troublesome. And I guess the difference is, if you go to, you talk about families that are, having divisiveness over issues. It's always, there's always the joke about the Thanksgiving table, right, where there's, conversation and differing views, and certainly that's been exacerbated over the last few years. Well, those are conversations. Hopefully they're not recorded. Nobody has their phone out during those times. And yes, people may get upset or whatnot, but it's a very different medium than when it's online, because what, just once again, take Facebook, for example, or Twitter, or whatever you'd like, is somebody posts something, and it's sort of indelible, but more so, you have then people essentially pile on because you have all these likes, and all their sort of like-minded friends or colleagues or whatever. So it's not just, say, the uncle or the person at the Thanksgiving table who was saying things that were beyond, that might be racist or bigoted or anti-gay. Now it's that person plus it's this whole sort of people, and once again, whether they are truly racist or bigoted or whatnot, it's not necessarily, you don't know what's in their heart, because oftentimes their motivation is more political, depending upon the post. And so, it's the same thing. So you point out, look, here's the issue, and they come back and say, oh, you're just being partisan, you just don't like the president or whatever, right? And they fail to see these issues, and that's a really common kind of scenario that we have, but instead of it sort of being left at the table, that hopefully by the time you get to the pumpkin pie, people have kind of moved on. It's this conversation that just lingers and keeps going and keeps going. So the harm and the angst that it causes people just continues.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that conversation face to face and in a forum where you can't see the other person's reaction, you can't see, what their eyes do. And, in the way that Daniel said that people don't even use their voice sometimes, not using your voice is a complete, not hearing the tones in my voice and me typing something is a very different way of communicating that can totally be skewed. I mean, we've all had emails where we're like, what did that person mean in that email? And it's misrepresenting what they mean, even in something that small, let alone, trying to discern whether something is a racist comment or not. Right.
Right. And look, it's not that I am the judge of what is racist or not. And it's not like I'm going online looking and trying to be a police or something like that. But it's just sometimes it's like, like Potter Stewart said, about, I guess, a certain form of film. Sometimes you know when you see it, and it is more important, I think, than it's ever been. I mean, it sounds a little bit cliche-ish, but we just can't let things go anymore. We just can't. Because I think that's part of how we've kind of gotten to where we are right now, is not speaking out and saying, look, this just isn't right. And so we have to now. When you see something that isn't right, it's important, I think, to call it out appropriately and politely. And I think that last part is critical, particularly now. Is how you do it is really important as well.
And so, Daniel, for your work, where do we go from here? Where's the hope? Because I think there's definitely a side to the company's accountability, but, as we've been discussing, there's a huge amount of personal responsibility here that people need to take ownership of their words and their actions. So what, from your vantage point, do you see the hope in the future of both online gaming, social media platforms?
I think there are a couple different areas. So one is, I think, as imperfect as they are, right? Like, I think every platform has reporting features, and that folks should make use of them when they see these kinds of behaviors. Like, it's important that platforms get information about what their users are seeing, and that they, even if they are less than stellar in their response, that folks really do use the affordances that implemented by the companies to address these kinds of things. And I think, it's hard to, it's like, I think the onus is a lot on companies, unfortunately, right? Because I feel like, like, the reason why we talk about this is not because, social media or online games are like bad spaces in and of themselves, right? That the reason why, in the same way that the reason why we talk about this is because there can be such powerful connection and such powerful use for digital social spaces to connect people, to, create movements, to organize for social justice, that when folks at the same time, right? So I think one of the interesting things we looked at the platform Discord, right, which is a social platform that's also used for gaming, and the same affordances that make it a space where extremists love to organize are the same affordances that for people who want a private space where they're not going to be harassed, like people who in the LGBTQ community, same affordances that make it, really powerful for extremist organizing also make it powerful for a private space for people who are targeted in public social media, right? And so, I think there's a real case to be made for how do we how do civil society and individuals, through the power of their voice, make these spaces better and advocate for change, so that we can identify what is powerful and connects us in these spaces, and can try to deter and create rules and processes to make sure that the hate that exists in our society doesn't become further duplicated in these systems.
And I'd also, remind everyone that if they have any incidents of anti-Semitism, racism, discrimination, to please report those incidents on our website at adl.org, report incidents, and you can do that. It's helpful to us to know where these things are occurring, and we will react to those occurrences as we can. So please go to our website and do that if you do encounter, if anyone does encounter any incidences of hate.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to link that in the description as well. And just one final thought. How do you, because both of you deal with witnessing the hate of others, and, I'm sure maybe even, in your own lives, other issues of hate in doing the work of ADL. How do you deal with that? Because if someone sees hate in social media, it affects them, even if sometimes it's not directed at that person. You see that and you're like, wow, I can't believe that is still so present in the world, and it affects you, right? So I'm interested in how both of you who do this work all the time, what do you do to kind of keep yourself hopeful, to keep yourself moving forward, to be kind of the light for others, so that, even though you see this, even though you witness it, it doesn't define who you are. It doesn't define the world as a whole. This is a small pocket of people who just hate for whatever reason. So what do each of you do, or what can you share to help people, stay focused that there is good?
For me, I think one of the things that, as we talk about, transgressive streamers, or we talk about people who are publicly, like, I think there are a number of people and organizations, specifically related to gaming, that do really powerful work of modeling. What does it mean to play well in these spaces? What does it mean to foster an inclusive community? I usually point ferociously Steph, who is a trans game streamer who just does a really beautiful job of creating a community that fosters understanding, that fosters respect, and there are a number of game streamers who do that. So, like, I think especially for parents who are like, oh my God, online games, right? Like, what are my kids doing, right? I would say, look for people who are professional, streamers, gamers in this industry, who are creating these kinds of communities, and talk to the young people in your life about, how are they playing? Like, how are they doing this? How can you bring this, how do you play like them, or what can you bring into how you play? So I think about that. I watch people like that, and it inspires me that, like, as bad as some of the things we see are, there are people who are working every day through the how they participate in these communities to make them respectful and inclusive communities for all.
For me, I think it's understanding and knowing that that most people, even the vast majority of people, are open to being better and to understanding uh, how they're, everybody's imperfect, how everybody has, biases, yet um, they can still learn and still improve, and that it's always going to be an ongoing process. And as long as, you are open and understanding um, of yourself, that it exists. Um, I think at this moment in time, I certainly think that we are confronting a strong group of people uh, who aren't as open, um, and that's evident, and so that makes it challenging. Uh, but ultimately, I do believe that is not the vast majority of the people. Uh, and so that's why I'm optimistic. And so if because when you do talk to people and you can help them understand, um, they they do understand, um, and so that's what keeps me going.
Well, thank you both for this great conversation. And I feel like I learned a lot. I'm not as exposed to the gaming world, but it's great to understand the intricacies of both the social media, the gaming, just on, everything that happens online, because it's changing so fast. And
Well,
both of you are doing the
Daniel,
work.
you didn't ask Bridget if she plays any game.
Let me think. I used to be really good at Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's
Way
still
back
around.
in the day,
That's
way
still
when I
around.
was in college.
Yeah, that's still around. That's still going.
Yeah, but no, I don't game much. I don't play many games, so, and I don't, personally, I don't engage in a ton of social media. I do for work, but You know, I love to hear the stories of hope, or the, you know, the good content, or see what some of the groups that you were talking about that you work with are putting out there to push issues and share messages, you know. So thank you for your work and your expertise on these things, both of you. I really appreciate the conversation.
Oh, thanks for having us, Bridget.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having us and for facilitating.